My name is Deanna Hartwell. I'm 54 years old, and in 30 years of practicing law, I've negotiated my way out of 3 lawsuits, 2 business partnerships gone bad, and 1 very ugly custody dispute that wasn't even mine. But the hardest negotiation of my life happened in a backyard in Charlotte, North Carolina, at my daughter's graduation party, when my son-in-law's mother looked at my husband and told him he didn't belong there. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply stood beside my husband, took his hand, and walked him through the side gate while 60 guests watched us leave. My daughter thought I was abandoning her on the best day of her life. Patricia Calloway thought she had won. She had no idea that the quiet woman walking away from that party was about to stop protecting everyone from the consequences of their own choices. Before I tell you what happened during the 8 months that followed, you need to understand how we got there. I grew up the daughter of a postal worker in Greensboro. My father carried mail for 31 years in heat that could melt the soles off your shoes, and he never complained where I could hear him. He used to tell me, "A person's word is the only thing they own outright. Everything else is rented from the bank." I went to UNC on a partial scholarship, and loans I paid off at 38. Eventually, I built a small but respected family law practice over 26 years. My husband, Ryan, is 52. We met at a continuing legal education seminar, of all places, in a hotel conference room with terrible coffee and even worse lighting. I asked him to dinner before the second session even started. We've been married for 26 years. Ryan taught high school English for 2 decades before becoming a court-appointed advocate for children in custody cases. He has always been the kind of man who quietly gives everything he has without asking anyone to notice. Our daughter Madison is 26. She's sharp, funny, stubborn, and determined in a way that makes me proud and exhausted in equal measure. That spring, she finished her master's in public health, and I had never seen her work harder for anything. Madison's husband, Tyler, is not a bad man. He's quiet, a little unsure of himself, an engineer who designs water treatment systems, and he genuinely loves my daughter. The problem was never Tyler. The problem walked in 2 steps behind him the first time he brought his mother to dinner. Patricia Calloway was a widow who ran a boutique real estate brokerage in one of the wealthier suburbs outside Charlotte. Tyler's father had died when Tyler was 17, and Patricia had raised him alone while building a successful business. I respected what she had accomplished. What I didn't respect was the way she looked around our house during those first 10 minutes, as though she were inspecting something she might eventually own. She complimented our kitchen by saying, "It's so charming that you've kept the original cabinets." Ryan had refinished those cabinets himself over 2 summers. He simply smiled and thanked her. Later that night, my brother-in-law Frank pulled me aside in the garage. "Deanna, that woman has already decided who's going to be in charge of this family, and it isn't either of us." I laughed and told him he was being dramatic. I wish I hadn't. My first mistake was dismissing Frank. My second came 4 months later, when Madison casually mentioned that Patricia had asked Tyler what kind of retirement accounts we had, what my law practice was worth, and whether I owned the building where my office operated. I filed those questions away under things that didn't need a response yet. I was wrong. The 2 years between that first dinner and Madison's wedding weren't dramatic. That was precisely what made Patricia so difficult to confront. She never openly insulted Ryan. She simply found quiet ways to make him feel like an outsider. A bridal shower was moved up a week with only 2 days' notice. Ryan discovered a family photo session because he saw pictures from it on Instagram. Invitations somehow reached Patricia's relatives before they reached us. Every interaction seemed to pass through Tyler, leaving Ryan and me 1 step removed from our own daughter's life. Ryan started doing something I had never seen him do in 24 years of marriage. Before family gatherings, he would rehearse what he was going to say in the car. He would try different sentences, wondering whether they sounded too intrusive or too defensive. That hurt me more than anything Patricia ever said directly to me. I could handle her opinions. What I couldn't stand was watching her slowly erode my husband's confidence. The wedding 18 months before the graduation party was another lesson. Patricia's family filled nearly 3/4 of the guest list. Ryan and I were seated near the kitchen doors, close enough to hear dishes moving through the pass-through window. During the reception, Patricia gave a long speech about the Calloway family legacy and everything she had sacrificed while raising Tyler alone. She spoke warmly about Madison twice. She never mentioned Ryan or me. I held my husband's hand under the table and told myself weddings weren't about the parents. I told myself I was being the bigger person. I told myself patience was something I could afford. What I didn't understand was that every time I accepted disrespect in the name of peace, I was teaching everyone around me that there was no line they could cross. Madison's graduation party was supposed to be different. It was a backyard gathering at Madison and Tyler's new house, with around 60 people, barbecue catered for the afternoon, and a rented arch covered in string lights for photographs. Madison had worked herself nearly into the ground for that degree. 2 years of clinical rotations on top of coursework. Ryan spent a month planning the party because that's who he is. He ordered a banner, found Madison's childhood teddy bear, and placed it beside a framed photograph of her wearing her kindergarten graduation cap. It was a small, sentimental joke only her father would have thought of. We arrived at 4 in the afternoon. The backyard was already half full. Patricia stood near the gazebo in a cream dress, champagne in hand, surrounded by people I assumed were clients or country club friends. She saw us arrive. She didn't wave. Instead, she looked directly at Ryan with the expression of someone who had already decided he didn't belong in the picture. For the first 40 minutes, everything actually felt normal. Madison gave a short speech thanking everyone for coming. She thanked Tyler's family for their generosity and then became emotional when she talked about Ryan and me. She said her father had always quietly believed in her, even when she called home crying about exam scores. Ryan put his arm around her when she finished. I could see tears in his eyes. For those few minutes, we felt exactly where we were supposed to feel, like parents celebrating their daughter. Then Patricia walked toward our table. I knew something was coming before she reached us. She didn't sit down. She stood beside Ryan's chair with a champagne flute in her hand and smiled at the people around us. Then she said loudly enough for several guests to hear, "I just have to say it's so nice that Madison's parents could make it. I know things have been busy for you both." The wording was polite. The meaning wasn't. Ryan smiled and said it had been a wonderful afternoon. He even thanked Patricia for helping Tyler host. Her smile became thinner. She placed her champagne glass on our table without asking and said, "I've been wanting to say something for a while, and I think today is as good a day as any." She looked around. 2 of her clients had moved closer. Tyler's former groomsman was listening. Madison's college roommate had gone silent. Patricia continued, "I think it would be good for this family if we were honest about roles going forward." Ryan looked at her calmly. "What do you mean?" Patricia tilted her head. "Tyler and Madison are starting their real life now. They don't need quite so much hovering from either side, but I think we both know which side has been doing more of it." Ryan's expression changed. He was deciding whether to defend himself or absorb the insult. "Patricia, I'm not sure what you mean by hovering," he said. "We've tried to be present, not intrusive." "Of course you have," she replied, using the same tone someone might use with a child who had misunderstood an obvious instruction. "But there's a difference between being present and needing to be needed." Then she claimed Tyler had told her Ryan called Madison constantly about the house, decisions, and little things. It wasn't true. Ryan called our daughter maybe twice a week, usually about books, recipes, or her dog. I set my fork down. "Patricia, that isn't accurate, and I'd ask you to lower your voice." "This isn't the place for this." She looked directly at me. "I'm talking to Ryan, Deanna." Then she turned back to my husband. "I think it's important for Madison to build her own home with her own values, not the one she was raised with by 2 parents who, frankly, have always been a little too involved in her decisions." She paused. "The retirement accounts, the house down payment, all of it. We all know whose money smoothed things over, don't we?" My stomach tightened. 2 years earlier, Ryan and I had quietly given Madison and Tyler $10,000 toward their down payment. We had never mentioned it to anyone outside the 4 of us. Across the yard, Tyler stood frozen near the drink table. His glass was halfway to his mouth. He had heard every word, and he still said nothing. Ryan stood slowly. His hands were trembling, but his voice remained calm. Patricia, maybe we should talk about this another time. Today is about Madison. Patricia shook her head. No, I'm tired of everyone pretending this is fine. I've watched you two orbit this family for 2 years like you're afraid to let go. And I think today, in front of everyone who loves these kids, is exactly the right time to say it. She looked around the yard. Conversations had begun to disappear. 60 people were becoming very quiet. Patricia turned toward Ryan. You need to learn your place in this family because right now you don't seem to understand what it is. I could see the hurt spreading across my husband's face. Then Patricia said the words that I will never forget. You don't belong here, Ryan. Not the way you think you do. This is Tyler and Madison's family now, not yours. I have stood in courtrooms while people threatened each other over custody of children they barely visited. I have negotiated settlements with people who hated me personally. But in that moment, I wanted to say something more than I had ever wanted to say anything in my professional life. I wanted to destroy every argument she had just made. Instead, I stood. I walked around the table and put my hand on Ryan's shoulder. I looked across the yard at Madison. She was standing near the gazebo with her hand over her mouth, staring between Patricia and her father as though she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Then I looked at Tyler. His eyes were on the ground. I waited until he finally looked up at me. We'll talk later, son, I said. 4 words, no shouting, no insult, no threat. Then I took Ryan's hand and walked with him toward the side gate. Madison called my name behind us. Her voice cracked. I almost turned around. But I didn't. It wasn't because I didn't love my daughter. I loved her more than anything. It was because I knew that if I turned around, I would be forced to choose between comforting Madison and protecting the dignity of the man she had just watched being humiliated. For the first time in my life, I understood that those two things were not always the same. Ryan didn't cry until we were 2 blocks from the house. Then he cried quietly, the way he almost never does. I drove without turning on the radio. Finally, he whispered, "Why didn't she say anything?" I knew he meant Madison, not Patricia. I didn't have an answer that could make the moment better. So I simply kept driving. When we reached home, I sat with him on the back porch until the sky went dark. Neither of us said much, but there was something Ryan didn't know. 2 months before the graduation party, an old law school friend of mine named Robert Anansley had called me. His firm was expanding its real estate litigation practice and had recently taken on a dispute involving improper commission practices at several boutique brokerages in the area. He hadn't named anyone. I hadn't asked. It had seemed like ordinary professional conversation between 2 old friends, but sitting beside Ryan that night, I remembered the call differently. 2 days later, I called Robert. I told him exactly what had happened at the graduation party. He listened quietly. Then he said, "Deanna, I'm not going to pretend I don't know who you mean. Patricia Calloway's name has already come up in that litigation review." He explained that there were questions about disclosure practices on several high-value listings. Nothing criminal. Nothing dramatic. Usually, he said, cases like that ended in a settlement and a warning. Then he asked me a question. "What do you want me to do?" I answered carefully. "Nothing you wouldn't already be doing. I'm not asking you to hurt her. I'm asking you not to protect her from a process that would happen to anyone else." Robert understood. He told me he would let the process move forward normally. I never asked him to manufacture evidence. I never asked him to attack Patricia. I simply stopped trying to make sure that every consequence in her life stayed away from her. The next night, Tyler called me. His voice sounded rehearsed. "Mom was under a lot of stress," he said. "The market has been difficult." She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She wants to apologize to Ryan. I stayed quiet for several seconds. Then I said, "Tyler, your mother told my husband he didn't belong in your family in front of 60 people at your wife's graduation party, and you stood there." The silence on the other end was long. "I know," he finally said. "I need you to understand something," I told him. "Before we talk about what your mother intended, I need you to think about what you did and didn't do." "That's not fair." "It is fair. Call me when you're ready to talk about that part." Then I hung up. Madison texted me that night, then again the next morning. I waited almost a day before calling her because I knew anything I said while I was still angry would make things worse. When I finally answered, her voice was raw. "Mom, how could you just leave? You embarrassed me in front of everyone." I took a breath. Madison, your father was humiliated in front of everyone first. I didn't embarrass you. I protected the only thing I could protect in that moment, your father's dignity and my own." She was silent. "I'm sorry the timing didn't fit the day you had planned," I continued. "But I'm not sorry that I walked away." She didn't know what to say. Before we ended the call, I told her, "I love you completely. Nothing happening between me and Patricia changes that, but I need you to think carefully about what you saw in that backyard. Your silence and Tyler's silence said something. That isn't a punishment. It's simply the truth, and you're old enough to sit with it." The weeks that followed were painfully quiet. Patricia never called. Tyler called twice, but each time his apology circled around the issue without actually touching it. Then Madison came to our house alone one Thursday evening. She sat at the kitchen table and cried for nearly an hour. Ryan held her the way he had held her since she was a little girl. "Finally," she said. "I should have said something. I froze. I didn't know what to do." I told her that freezing was human. What mattered was what she did afterward. 3 weeks later, Robert called me again. The review involving Patricia's brokerage had moved forward. 2 former clients had filed formal complaints about misrepresented property conditions on luxury listings. It wasn't headline news, but it was serious enough to reach the local real estate licensing board. I hadn't pushed a single domino. Patricia had built that situation herself long before I ever met her, and eventually, the foundation she had built began to crack. I won't pretend I felt nothing when I heard the news. I did feel satisfaction, but satisfaction wasn't the same as revenge. I hadn't created the problem. I had simply stopped standing between Patricia and the consequences of her own choices. 5 months after the graduation party, Tyler asked to meet me alone at a diner near my office. He looked exhausted, not physically exhausted. It was the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying guilt for too long. He sat across from me and stared at his coffee. "I knew," he said. I waited. "I knew Mom had been saying things to Madison for months. Little comments. Things I told myself would disappear if I didn't make them a bigger deal." He looked at me. "That's not the same as not knowing." "No," I said. "It isn't." He was quiet for a while, then he asked, "Can you forgive me for standing there?" I thought about it instead of giving him the easy answer. "I love Madison, and because I love her, I want your marriage to work. But forgiveness isn't something you get simply because you ask for it. It's something you earn through what you do next. I need to see who you become from here." "I don't need another promise." Tyler nodded. "Madison and I started counseling," he said. "I don't know where it will take us, but I know I can't be the man who stands there silently while someone hurts my wife's family." "Good," I told him, and I meant it. Patricia never sent me a letter. She never called to explain herself. Instead, 6 months after the graduation party, she appeared unexpectedly at Madison and Tyler's house. Ryan happened to be there helping Madison repaint a guest room. Patricia stood in the doorway for several seconds before speaking. According to Ryan, the confidence that normally surrounded her had disappeared. "I heard about the review," she said. "I assume that was you." Ryan calmly told her he didn't know what review she was talking about. That was true. I had never told him exactly what Robert and I had discussed. Patricia studied him for a moment, then her shoulders dropped slightly. "I said something I shouldn't have said that day," she finally admitted. "I've thought about it." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it wasn't nothing. Ryan told her he appreciated her saying it and left the conversation there, because Ryan had never needed the last word. He only needed the freedom to stop feeling like he had to earn his place in his own family. I'm not going to tell you everything suddenly became perfect, because it didn't. I don't trust stories that wrap every problem in a neat little bow. Patricia and Ryan didn't become friends. They became cordial. At family gatherings, they were careful with each other, the way 2 people are careful around something they both know is fragile. The brokerage review eventually ended with a settlement and a formal warning on Patricia's license. It didn't destroy her career. It didn't ruin her life. But it left a permanent mark on the reputation she had spent decades building. I never told Patricia that my conversation with Robert had happened. She never directly asked me. I think she suspected. And strangely, I didn't mind. But the thing that mattered most to me wasn't Patricia's consequence. It was Madison. 8 months after the graduation party, Madison and I began having dinner together every other Sunday at a little Italian restaurant near her old apartment. The restaurant had nothing to do with either family. We talked about her work, her patients, her future, and sometimes absolutely nothing. That was enough. One night, over a plate of pasta neither of us finished, Madison looked at me and said, "Mom, I finally understand why you walked away." I waited. "I used to think you left because you couldn't handle what Patricia said. Now I think you left because you could handle it. You just refused to handle it the way she wanted you to." I smiled but didn't answer. I didn't need to. Ryan changed too. He stopped rehearsing his sentences before family gatherings. He laughed louder at dinner parties. He stopped apologizing before offering an opinion. Slowly, the man who had once been nervous about taking up space in his own daughter's family became the man I married 26 years earlier. The man who had always believed that kindness did not require surrender. Tyler changed too. He finally understood that staying silent to keep peace wasn't keeping peace at all. It was simply giving Patricia permission to keep controlling the room. People sometimes ask why I didn't say something when Patricia told my husband he didn't belong. They usually mean it as gentle criticism. They think I should have shouted. They think I should have humiliated her in return. But here is what I learned. Anything I said in that backyard would have become the story people carried home. Not Patricia's words, not Ryan's hurt, not Tyler's silence. Me, my anger. Whatever sharp thing I might have said in the heat of the moment. Patricia would have used it as proof that we were the problem, so I chose something different. I took my husband's hand and walked away. But there is something else I need to admit. The silence I chose that day was not the same silence I had chosen during the previous 2 years. Those were two completely different things. For 2 years, I had watched small comments slide. I had told myself I was being patient. I had watched Ryan become less confident around Patricia and convinced myself it wasn't serious enough to confront. That silence cost us. It cost Ryan the comfort he deserved in rooms where he had every right to belong. But the silence in that backyard was a decision. It was controlled. It was deliberate. It was me refusing to let Patricia decide who I would become in response to her cruelty. There is a difference between swallowing disrespect and choosing not to dignify it. I understand that difference now. You can absorb a great deal for the people you love, more than you think possible. But there comes a point when absorbing stops being love and starts becoming erasure. You are allowed to take up space in your own family without apologizing for it. You are allowed to protect your spouse without turning every disagreement into a war. And you are allowed to walk away when someone is trying to provoke you into becoming the villain in their story. Last Sunday, Madison brought up the graduation party again. It was the first time she had done it without either of us forcing the conversation. We were sharing a tiramisu the way we always do when she put her fork down and looked at me for a long moment. "Mom, that day you took Dad's hand and walked out." She stopped. "I've thought about it probably 200 times. I waited for her to continue. "I thought I knew what standing up for someone was supposed to look like. I thought it meant saying something loud enough that everyone heard you. But then I watched you leave without raising your voice, and I realized I didn't understand strength at all." I smiled. "Neither did I told her. "Not really, not until that moment." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I spent 2 years thinking strength meant being patient. I thought if I absorbed enough, eventually everyone would calm down. But there's a difference between patience and allowing someone to erase another person." Madison's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry I didn't stop her." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You froze, I understand that. What matters is what you did afterward." She nodded. She had confronted Tyler. She had begun counseling. She had started setting boundaries with Patricia. Those things mattered. We finished our dessert, paid the check, and walked outside into the cool evening. I remember thinking that we still had a long way to go. But for the first time, we were walking that road honestly. There are parts of that day I still think about when the house is quiet. Not Patricia's exact words. Those are easy to remember. What stays with me is Ryan's face. My husband had spent years being the person who made everyone else comfortable. He had learned to swallow discomfort because he believed peace was worth almost any price. And I had helped him do it because I told myself I was protecting our family. I know better now. Protecting a family doesn't mean protecting every person's behavior inside it. Sometimes protecting your family means refusing to allow one person's need for control to define everyone else's place. Madison learned that. Tyler learned it more slowly. Patricia had spent years making small comments and watching everyone ignore them. The graduation party was simply the first time she said the quiet part loudly enough for everyone to hear. Her professional consequences didn't erase what happened. They didn't make Ryan trust her again. They didn't undo the years of exclusion. But they reminded everyone that actions have consequences even when they are delivered with a smile. Ryan eventually learned about my conversation with Robert. He looked at me for a long time and asked, "Did you do that because of me?" I told him the truth. No, I didn't create anything. I just stopped standing in the way of consequences that already belonged to her. He nodded. Then he smiled. "That sounds like you." I laughed. Patricia and Ryan remained cordial. Madison and Tyler continued working on their marriage, and Ryan finally stopped wondering whether he was welcome in a family he had helped build through years of love, support, and sacrifice. That was the real victory for me. Not Patricia's warning, not the investigation, not knowing she suspected my involvement. It was seeing my husband walk into a family gathering without rehearsing his words in the car. If you ask me today whether I regret leaving that graduation party, my answer is no. I regret that the situation ever reached that point. I regret every time I noticed Patricia's behavior and convinced myself it wasn't serious enough to confront. I regret every time I watched Ryan rehearse his sentences before family gatherings and called it nervousness instead of recognizing what was happening. But I do not regret taking his hand that day. I don't regret walking through that side gate. And I don't regret refusing to turn my daughter's graduation into a screaming match that would have allowed Patricia to paint herself as the victim. After 30 years of practicing law, you might think I would have known that strength doesn't always look like winning an argument. Sometimes strength is knowing the argument isn't worth having. Sometimes dignity looks like leaving the room. Sometimes the most powerful answer is refusing to become the person someone else is trying to provoke you into becoming. Ryan is still the man I married 26 years ago. He laughs louder now. He speaks without rehearsing. He walks into family gatherings without wondering whether someone wants him there. Madison and I still have our Sunday dinners. Tyler is learning what it means to protect the family he chose instead of automatically defending the family he came from. Patricia and Ryan are cordial, nothing more, nothing less. A few weeks ago, Madison looked at me over dinner and said, "Mom, I finally understand something. You didn't walk away from me that day. You walked away with Dad because you refused to let someone convince him he didn't belong." I squeezed her hand. "That's exactly what I did." She smiled. And for the first time since that graduation party, I felt like my daughter finally understood the choice I had made. You can absorb a great deal for the people you love. But there is a point where absorbing stops being love and starts becoming erasure. You are allowed to take up space in your own family without apology. You are allowed to protect the people you love without becoming cruel yourself. And when someone tries to push you out of a life you helped build, you don't always have to destroy them to prove your worth. Sometimes you simply step away, keep your dignity, and let their own choices bring the consequences they were always going to face. That day, Patricia thought she had humiliated my husband and pushed us out of her family. She didn't realize that by telling Ryan he didn't belong, she had finally given me a reason to stop pretending everything was fine. And in the end, I didn't need to defeat her. I only needed to stop protecting her from herself. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to Heartline Narratives, and share your thoughts about the story in the comments. Thank you for watching.